Hey, it's the Arvind and Mike show. He's an education investor and I'm an education entrepreneur. We are both dads to 2 kids. He's a Carolina Tar Heel with Indian parents, whereas I am a Duke Blue Devil with Jewish parents. All of which meaning there are 4 retirees out there disappointed that neither of us became doctors.
Mike, what's your kid story today?
I don't have a kid story today.
Give me a kid story from your kid days playing basketball.
When I was in 7th grade, when I first went to junior high school, I tried out for the basketball team. There were 31 kids who tried out, and there were going to be 12 to 14 spots. And I looked at some of the kids who were trying out. For some reason, a kid named Eric Moyer comes to mind, who were really good athletes, but the coach didn't seem to like kids who were a little show-offy or not diligent, right? He was looking for hustle in players that didn't have actual good basketball skills. So I remember I'd never been to anything organized basketball in my life. I would come home and collapse on the floor. I'd be so exhausted from all the suicide sprints we'd run. And at the end of the tryouts, I got the last spot. I made the team, and it had a huge boost to my identity as a teenager to have made a sports team.
Wow.
Yes. The other memory I have from junior high basketball was at the end of the season, the coach gave each player a note card. And it said 2 things that you were good at and something you needed to work on. And so like Bobby Kaufman, our point guard, like his, said ball handling, strength. He was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And defense, strength, like his on-ball defense, like you couldn't get by the guy. He would just steal it from you every time. My 2 strengths, can you guess what they were?
Positive attitude.
I got quickness and hustle.
Ooh, hustle is basically positive attitude.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you got credit for that. And then I think like to work on was like everything else. Shooting, layups, passing, rebounding, on and on. But anyway, yeah, that's my youth hoop story.
Well, okay, I'll give you a youth hoop story as well, which is it's rare in life. A lot of economists struggle with the fact that we don't have good counterfactuals. But in my basketball career, I had the perfect counterfactual.
Yep.
I went to a school, Country Day, that's very good at basketball. They have a lot of great players. Chris Webber went there.
Wow.
Shane Battier, JaVale McGee. So we've had our share of NBA players go through here. So we have a very good... When I was a senior, our starting 5 was 6'4", 6'7", 6'8", 6'10", and 6'10". That was my senior year starting 5.
That's insane.
Freshman year, there's 3 squads in our basketball team. There's varsity, JV, and a freshman squad.
Okay.
So I make the freshman squad, and I'm starting on the freshman squad. I'm a starter. And there's this one guy that's very similar build to me, also Indian, that happens to be like essentially my backup. After freshman year, it's a pretty forgettable season, but after freshman year, I decided to focus more on tennis. My tennis career is going pretty well. So I decided to quit basketball, but I have this wonder, like, man, I wonder what I could have been on the basketball court. But I had this counterfactual, which is this Indian guy, similar build.
Yes.
And he he decided to go double down on basketball. He went to basketball camps, and he became basically the best version of what I could have become on a court.
Yes.
He developed this amazing shot, never going to be the quickest guy, but just he really maxed out. And he ended up making varsity senior year and being the last guy on the bench.
If you did it all over, would you have gone down that road and put in the work?
If I had gone down the road, I would have put in the work. but I didn't. And what was so nice was we would be at these basketball games and we'd be crushing these teams by like 20, 25 points. And then our entire student section would start chanting his name.
Right, like the Celtics do now for Taco Fall.
Exactly. And I was just like, I feel good with my decision to quit.
You do feel good. Okay, all right, got it.
If that's the best case scenario where I'm like a spectacle at the end of games, you can do better than that.
Anyway, on we go.
So today's topic is a great segue here, which is we're talking about basketball analytics. You want to start with a little bit of a primer? Give me a little of the history from the childhood version of Mike Goldstein. Let's walk through how analytics evolved.
7-year-old Mikey Goldstein got a book called The Handbook of NBA Basketball, which I just ingested. I memorized. It had every player and their statistics, and I memorized it. And I loved it. And it was the first sort of data set I'd ever seen. I didn't realize at that time, like, oh, there's a certain nerdy quality to this. I loved it.
That's awesome. I had the same experience with hockey cards. I would just collect them, memorize all the stats on the back.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me, when did we start getting the analytics scene? When did the analytics scene start to hit basketball?
Yeah, so I think that the history of this is basically 70s, 80s, 90s. NBA stats are who scores a lot of points, who gets a lot of rebounds, who gets assists, blocks, and steals, right? And so I think that's even through the aughts. I think Moneyball in baseball, which, Michael Lewis wrote that book about the 2002 Oakland A's season where they're throwing a lot of conventional stats out the window. They're throwing a lot of advanced eye test, meaning like people who've been baseball scouts for 30 years, throwing out the mix of eye test, conventional stats out the window and choosing new stats to value as a way to find, hey, we might agree on 4 out of 5 players that we think are good, like the old guard and the young quants, but the young quants think one of those 5 people, like there are certain people that nobody's ever heard of that are quietly good, and the stats have been hiding their success, the old stats. So that, I think it's sort of like that's what happened in baseball, and the Oakland A's had a lot of success, and the Red Sox won the World Series and so forth, and then every team changed. And the NBA was a few years behind that.
Yeah. Daryl Morey, he started this conference called the Sloan Analytics Conference. And so I helped organize that for 2 years. So got to see his, that everyone and anyone who has to do with analytics comes to this conference. And you get to see really the boundaries being pushed. It's kind of amazing how big this cottage industry has become around pushing that frontier forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think the story in the mid, like the 2015-ish story, if you want to like make it about 2 players to make it simple, LeBron and Carmelo Anthony were thought to be like, among the 2 best NBA forwards, and they certainly scored the most. The eye test told you that they were the 2 best guys.
Yeah.
And the basic stats told you that. And in fact, some of the fancy new stats like player efficiency rating said those were the best guys. But there were rebel nerds who said, there's like the guy, John Hollinger, who worked for ESPN, who came up with player efficiency rating. That's the one that said Carmelo Anthony was good.
Yeah.
And then a bunch of rebel quants said, you're wrong. You're a bad nerd. You're an ineffective nerd. Your fancy stat is wrong. It turns out he's terrible. He actually hurts teams because he scores a lot because he shoots a ton. And the reason he passes the eye test is he makes some crazily difficult shots. So you're like, oh my God, nobody else could do that. But the fact is he turns the ball over a lot. He misses a lot of shots. He doesn't pass that well compared to LeBron. He doesn't rebound or defend well compared to LeBron. Turns out LeBron is a great player, even by the good nerds, but Carmelo was a bad player. And every year, Carmelo started getting like pushed around the league, whereas teams got better at stats. They would get rid of Carmelo and he would go hurt another team.
Yeah. Well, I mean, now I think he's a little bit, it seems like he finally took the lesson hard, because now that he's got another chance, I feel like he's trying to fit in more to a role than he ever has.
Right. The poor guy in 2018, he's like, I'm one of the best players in the NBA and nobody will even put me on their team. Like, he was shocked.
Which is also hilarious because LeBron and him are like great friends. LeBron has so much influence in who gets on his team, and yet somehow Carmelo never made it on his team all those years that he was just sitting there available.
You know, just imagine like your best friend, like, you know, LeBron is so sophisticated. He knows
Yeah.
Carmelo's not.
Yeah.
LeBron believes the advanced stats. He
Yeah.
knows that he's not as good. And so LeBron, I'm sure, right? He must be telling Carmelo when they're like chatting over drinks in South Beach. LeBron's like, yo, yeah, like I talked to our GM. I put in a word for you. I don't understand why they won't get you. And meanwhile, LeBron goes to his people and he's like, please do not get Carmelo. Absolutely not. We don't want him. He's not going to help us win a title. So poor Carmelo is like totally puzzled. And then, the Portland, they give him a chance and they're pretty sophisticated. Maybe they see something that other people don't see. And maybe they think, some of the stats that we're saying Carmelo is actually terrible are wrong. And Carmelo, maybe he's not great, but he's pretty good. Who knows?
Yeah.
What I love, I think, about some of the advanced stats, the good advanced stats, right? So the surprise stories. A lot of times the advanced stats just confirm what you already know.
Yeah.
Dwayne Wade is really good. LeBron is really good. Tim Duncan was unbelievable. But, for example, a bunch of advanced stat nerds believe that Kobe is overrated.
Yes.
Now, most NBA players, first of all, think he was like...
Yes. It's probably the biggest gap.
Among the three best players of all time.
Yeah.
And the nerds are like, no. Kobe won the first three titles mostly because of Shaq. And he won his other two titles. And this is where people would concede, okay, Shaq was really important. What would make them punch you in the face is if you say he won in 2009 and 2010 because of Pau Gasol and Andrew Bynum. Those guys were 7-footers that were remarkably good by NBA 7-footer standards.
Yeah.
And, anybody who's ever watched a game would dismiss you with utter contempt if you say that. But of course, that's kind of the fun part of nerd. Like, nobody even knows who Andrew Bynum is, and yet he really delivered 2 NBA titles to Phil Jackson and Kobe.
So you're taking the analytic side of that? So you're saying that he's the critical piece of that puzzle?
I do buy that. I do think, and it also explains why in those other years after Shaq left, without those 2 big guys, with Kobe scoring 30 a game and putting up shots everywhere, the team never contended.
Yeah. One thing I try to separate is there's the eye test, which is like when you watch Kobe, his skills were absolutely unbelievable. And I think, of course, any NBA player who had to try and guard him, it's just like, how do you even stop this guy? His repertoire of moves is just completely unstoppable. You're at his mercy. But that seems to like let us down in terms of not quite understanding that actually maybe that doesn't contribute as much to winning as we may anticipate.
I think that the people who study this say an eye test gives you a lot of valuable information, but what it rewards the most in basketball is scoring and cool made shots. So a made shot helps. A really tough contested made shot really makes you think the player is good. And so people like Kobe have so many of those. Hang in the air, outstretched defender arm, he still makes it. But what we're taught is that what your mind forgets systematically is misses, turnovers, other mistakes. So long as they're not bricks, like your mind will remember shots that clang horribly off the backboard and so forth. But as long as the shots are getting close and not going in, and they seem to happen in the flow of the game, the eye test misses some really important stuff. So that's why, for example, I think Dwayne Wade was a better player than Kobe, but most people think Kobe was a better player than Dwayne Wade.
Yeah. Separate from eye tests, where do you think like experiential knowledge fits in? So like if you take the most extreme example, you will never, no matter what textbook you read or what an analysis you get, you'll never understand childbirth. So if you take that to the next level, there's, if you look at football, there's only so much that analytics can tell you beyond actually getting run at and hit by a 250-pound linebacker with 4% body fat. That makes me wonder, because I think sometimes we tend to, because of the clear biases that hurt our eye test, I think we sometimes tend to, if you go too far on the quant side, completely ignore experiential knowledge, which is there's probably something to when Kobe makes a super tough jumper. That's just everyone feels like they're a little bit demotivated on the other side. The guy is not, the game is also an emotional one. And maybe the analytics can't, of course, one day they might be able to capture it, but it's only through making hypotheses based on your experiential knowledge and then trying to validate those through statistics.
I agree with you. I guess I feel like, imagine 4 tribes of people. There's the observational people, like the eye test people, the regular Joes. And then I would say the second tribe is the advanced version of that, right? Like somebody who's spent their whole life just watching baseball and that's their job. As a scout, they're going to know more than like a fan, right? So that's second tribe. Same with the numbers people, right? There's basic data, you and me, like reading baseball cards, and fans, playing fantasy. And then people, I would say with our backgrounds, like, love quant, good at quant, and they work for, let's say, the Boston Celtics or the Philadelphia 76ers. All they do is run numbers and test hypotheses, right? So there's a box. There's like the beginner version of observation and the advanced version. There's the beginning version of quant and there's the advanced version. I agree with you that these work best when you're interacting them well. And so the good observational people are working with the good data people. The good observational people are offering hypotheses, and often the good data people are testing those hypotheses.
Yep.
That's when it goes best. And when I was chief academic officer for Bridge, the CEO was great. He loved data, and big data was both part of how he thought the schools would get good and how also he could raise money from investors because they like the idea of big data. But I came to him and said, listen, I also care a lot about qualitative feedback. I want to hire like a couple people in Kenya and a couple people in Nigeria and a couple people in Liberia just to walk around and visit our schools and report what they're seeing. Like the eye test. I want to pay for a team of eye test people because it's very easy to get lost in the numbers. And that's why what I think the eye test does is it limits your downside. I think the data sometimes can get you terribly off course. I think that often actually happens with numbers.
Yeah.
People, they don't know the limits of the numbers. That's a problem.
This seems like the perfect time to bring up our friend JaVale McGee.
Yeah, go ahead. What do you think about JaVale McGee, your high school classmate, a 7-footer in the NBA to this day?
Yeah.
What do you think of him?
Isn't this almost the perfect example of where what you're talking about here? Because oftentimes he would show up in these PER rankings as like one of the top 10 players in the NBA. And he'd be playing 6 minutes a game and, grabbing boards, getting a couple putbacks. There'd be people who were really quant heavy saying JaVale McGee is quite underrated. But then anyone who watched JaVale McGee play was like, no, 6 minutes is about right. That seems like the right amount of time.
But what specifically did he do? Did he mess up that made you think he should be off the floor? Obviously also made the coaches think he should be off the floor.
Well, one is I think his hands are clumsy. Like he you can't actually, he could sometimes put things back or occasionally roll and dunk, but he doesn't have hands that you can actually run any plays through him. So he can't catch the ball well or pass well out of, so if you can't facilitate through that person, that's a real liability on the offensive end.
And by the way, I think that might be a stats lapse. I'm not 100% sure. There's a guy like that on the Celtics named Tristan Thompson, where a lot of balls bounce off his hands. And if somebody passes to you and you fumble it, I think they get the turnover. The passer is the one who is charged with the turnover, not the person whose hands it just bounced off, which is why I think the numbers have a weakness that the eye test was picking up on.
Yep.
But in future, assume if that's true, somebody's going to pick up on that, or somebody already has, and on the privately kept stats, the proprietary ones, and maybe that's why the coaches are like not playing him that much. That's already incorporated into their data, even if it's not in the public data.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a hypothesis too. I can't speak to Javal because I never really watched him, whether it was at your high school or in the pros. Haven't seen much of his game. You know, you mentioned the Javal thing and the eye test. Right now, there is that issue literally on the Celtics that I watch with my kids. And so what they hear me say is, there's a guy on our bench. His nickname is Time Lord. And he's a 7-footer.
His name is what? Who are you talking about?
Time Lord. Robert Williams.
Yep.
Stats love him. Love him. All nerds think he's unbelievable. The coach only plays him about 10 to 15 minutes a game out of 48 minutes. Why? And I think there's an aspect of the following. Time Lord, no question, sometimes messes things up. Like, you can tell that the coach just told him to do X and he forgets 10 seconds later and he does Z. And so he's sometimes just not following directions in a way that emotionally the coach responds to, of course, with great frustration. We just told him not to foul that guy, and he fouled that guy.
Yeah.
We've talked about Robert Williams. I really love Robert Williams' athleticism. He definitely leads the league in blocked shots of shots the shooter thought there was no chance this shot is getting blocked. Like, you see guys going like, what just happened? He was on the other side of the lane. Where did that guy come from? So I love the Time Lord. He
leads the league in a lot of things. He also leads the league in the, hey, that 3-point line, it's worth 3 points if somebody shoots from the other side of it. And that person that you're 5 feet away from, for some reason, is 40% from that spot. You just need to move up. What a roller coaster ride.
So the players they prefer are less effective, do not help the Celtics as much to win, even when you account for their ability to follow directions better.
Right.
But what you don't get is the emotional moment.
Yeah.
Is these coaches just keep having these emotional moments where it's like the guy couldn't follow the direction. And so they discount his contribution too much for his mistakes, when in net, he is, in fact, a better player than the guys they're giving more minutes to.
Yeah, but I mean, this is where it all gets so complicated, because my argument would be, what if by playing him more minutes, by showing that there's no consequences for not following the coach's directions, what if there are spillover effects on the remaining players? And so then you get a less disciplined team, because he's now no longer, he doesn't have a short leash even when he does things that are directly in contradiction to, so I don't know the specific example, but there is a potential scenario where, you need to establish a culture, and there's a risk of diluting that culture if you don't follow it. What do you think?
Yeah, totally agree. I think that the Celtics are at a point where they have an incredibly good team culture.
Yeah.
And so at the margins, this guy's mistakes or not would not actually affect team culture. But I so agree at that tipping point.
Actually, I take back my argument even, because at the very least, you could argue just put him in a couple more minutes a game. See, just try it. It's such an easy thing to experiment with. You could just say, hey, look, once a game when he messes up, I'm not going to yank him. And then just see, I'm going to try and get him to 14 minutes or whatever. I'm going to try and play him a little extra in the second quarter. And then you can it's so easy. There's so much data. That's such a lovely thing about basketball, is just the freaking quantity of data, that it's just such an easy thing to test.
Well, yeah, but the interesting point is, despite this data, at least the publicly available advanced data, where when this guy gets additional minutes, the Celtics do better. So they must have their own internal data, proprietary data, since they employ people just to run these types of numbers, that they think is better than the publicly available data, or why would they pay these guys?
Yeah.
And it must say that this guy needs to play less. Time Lord should play less.
But with Brad Stevens, I think he's pretty analytics forward.
He is. That's why I'm sort of wondering what their internal metrics show. Their private, the guys who all went to that Sloan conference you helped organize, that now those are all the guys who end up working for these professional sports teams.
Yep.
And what is their internal data? Maybe they're picking up stuff like what you were saying with Javal and having the ball bounce off his hands.
Yeah. Let's try to spin this into education.
Okay.
What do you think? How do you think education is similar to NBA in terms of analytics?
Same thing. So the tribes that I see are always the same. There are eye test people, that's most people in education.
Yeah.
There are advanced eye test people. Doug Lamov is better at watching like a typical class than a typical teacher or principal. He notices a lot more.
Yeah.
There are a lot of stats and measurements in education with a lot of like not like maybe you and me baseball card level analysis of the stats, like pretty dumb analysis. So it's a wash in data. Most people can't get the right signal from it.
Yeah.
And then there are some people like John Barron at the Arnold Foundation who is unbelievable at looking at all the different data and studies out there. And his target almost is the quants that misuse data. So in a way, he's the best friend of the eye test people, the typical teacher, because he's constantly taking all these quants to task because he's a better quant than they are.
Yeah. You know what's really great in basketball that they're getting to, which would just be so awesome in education, which is they now at an individual player level, the analytics departments within those teams will essentially sit down with the player and say, look, you're doing all this stuff so well. They'll show them their shot chart and say, look, when you shoot in this spot, you're shooting 42%. Like, that is amazing. When you get to that spot, pull the trigger behind the three. Don't hesitate, because this spot, your money. You can use the stats to show people why they're good and help them do more of that. Think about that in education. Wouldn't that be awesome if for a teacher, you're saying, look, when you open a lesson with this kind of curiosity puzzle, look at your students' engagement levels. Look what happens, coming out of that. Is that ridiculous?
No, I think that in terms of teacher improvement, there are a lot of people and programs that try to both combine observational data with test score data, student test score data, to both figure out who's doing better or worse at teaching, and also to try to help individual teachers get better. So for example, I created this program in New Orleans where it was one-to-one teacher coaching, and we organized it as a randomized control trial, which really kind of, messed a little bit with our funders who were just like, why don't you just coach the people? I'm like, no. I need a control group of the exact same types of people who don't get the coaching so we can just find out if our coaching was good. And it was really fascinating. The way we organized the coaching is we tried really hard to only allow teachers into the trial who actually wanted somebody to observe their class and give them feedback, which sounds like a duh type of move.
Yeah.
But in most schools, teacher coaching is imposed on the teacher. So just imagine, like, you didn't ask for it. Somebody shows up to watch you. You don't really trust them, and they might not agree with your philosophy of teaching, and it's just an unpleasant experience. Whereas we had the benefit of saying, hey, this is the way we coach teachers. If you're interested, you can sign up. If you're not, no sweat. And if you do sign up, we'll randomly draw to see if you actually get the coaching. And we were able, so the economists found we were able to have a pretty large effect on teacher behavior and improving them. But it's very expensive. It takes a lot of time to coach someone. And obviously professional teams are willing to put almost any amount of money into each athlete, but school systems are not willing to put that kind of investment into their teachers.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of the personalization, like the data explosion around student data, a lot of it to me doesn't tend to link enough with the instructional practices that are getting them there.
Again, this is where I always feel like you need to combine the quant, like our students actually learn. You got to look at what the students are doing.
Yeah.
In fact, Bill Gates spent about $100 million, and he hired my neighbor, lives a couple miles away, Tom Kane, is a Harvard economist, to try to figure out how to measure effective teaching. Bill Gates arrives to K-12, right, as a donor, and he's like, this thing is insane. Nobody knows how to tell me who's good at teaching. There's just all these arguments, but there's not good data.
Yeah.
And they did some really good work, but even as they were doing it, the teachers' unions were hearing from their members, we kind of like how it was before, where every teacher evaluation shows the teacher is good. 100% of teachers in the typical evaluation are rated as good.
Yeah.
And so they're like, if you let Bill Gates and others sort of say, hey, there's this bucket of really good teachers who seem to help kids, and there's this bucket of weaker teachers that seem to, at minimum, not help kids so much, that's going to be unpleasant as the ramifications of that filter through the profession. And I think that they effectively were able to kill off like a 8-year effort to measure teachers using value added and other advanced metrics. And I think that's largely been pushed away.
But you know what? If I come back to basketball, what if you made it more opt-in as opposed to, so if you look at basketball now, there are still players that reject the analytics. They're like, I don't want to see that stuff. That stuff's not important to me. I play the game the way I play the game. And that's, you can have a contract for me or you cannot, but this is how I play the game. And then there are a greater and greater proportion that are embracing in some way or shape the analytic side of things, the data, to try to make them better because they understand, hopefully, if it makes them better, they get bigger contracts, they're in the league longer, they do better, they win championships, all the other things that they trust that that's the direction we're headed, so they want to kind of be on that boat. In most cases, no one's forcing players in basketball to adopt analytics in their game. If they say no and they're still performing well enough, they're fine in the league. They can do so. So what about if the same thing existed with teachers, which is if you say, I don't want observation, I don't want any teachers, you can decide whether to renew my contract or not, but this is how I'm going to do it. And then, teachers that were embracing this were like, oh, I want to get better. I think this is a path for me to get better. They could opt in.
Yeah, I wrote a paper for America Enterprise Institute where I basically said, every time we try to impose something on the teachers, whether it's an evaluation, a use of data, a curriculum, it never really works out. Why shouldn't the system be entirely teacher opt-in? Just from a realistic point of view, what you'd be able to do then is reach those that are willing. In this example, we happen to be talking about using data. You can get those that are willing to use data to start using data, and they get the tools that they want.
Yeah.
But the thinking largely in school systems is just, no, we have to set policies. Those policies will affect all teachers, and we're always looking for the next thing we're going to shove down teachers' throats. Now, look, that would be very justifiable if it had a good track record.
Right.
If heavy top-down thing showed results for kids, I would say, yeah, sorry, there's a lot of professions where you don't get to choose, but you just get to choose whether you want to join the profession. Like the military doesn't give you many choices. They're going to train the living bejesus out of you, and they're not going to give you any choices, and it seems to work. But you get the question of whether you want to do it in the first place. But it clearly leads to better results for the military. In teaching, it doesn't seem to be that way for a lot of reasons. That's why I think a half-loaf solution is what you just described.
Yeah.
The other thing real quick is the best school I've ever seen at using qualitative and quantitative data to give teacher feedback is a little group of charter schools in Boston called Edward Brooke Charter Schools. And it's led by a husband and wife team. And, this woman, Kim Stedman, is a fierce leader, went to Harvard Law School, got into education, created the school with John, her husband. And everybody I know who works there is an unbelievable, elite level teacher. And all of them describe the same thing. I thought I was good when I showed up. And then it was almost like Bill Belichick or Brad Stevens style. The type of feedback and improvement that I got was so, the expectations were really high, but they really delivered detailed, here is how you get better with this kid or that kid or this type of teaching move. And so one of our good family friends, Veronica, we thought she was good because she went through our match teacher program and all her reviews were stellar. And then she went to work for Brooke. She said, Mike, man, I thought I was good when I showed up, and they taught me, you got a long way to go. But they really built her into the powerhouse she is today in the classroom.
Wow. I think it's time to land this plane. I feel like it's something along the lines of, wouldn't it be awesome if teachers had access to coaches that could combine great quantitative data with qualitative observational data to help them improve?
That would be awesome.
Do you know I'm 1-0 against JaVale McGee?
1-0 in what game?
One day, I'm a senior in high school. He's a sophomore. I'm in the gym shooting actually with that Indian guy that had become my superior at that point.
Yes.
And him and one of the starters on the basketball team walk into the gym. And so we challenge these two to a game of 2-on-2.
Wait, the two 5'10" Indian guys.
5'11" and a half, please.
Well, I didn't know at that time. I thought you've grown since then. So, two sub 6 foot Indian guys
Yeah.
against two 6'8" guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're kind of taking it easy, and my buddy's a really good shooter. At one point, I literally cross over JaVale McGee and just little nice elbow jumper right in his face, and we win 15-9.
That's incredible. Yes.
That's the story. That's usually where I leave the story, but I'm going to give you
Oh, give me the bonus story. Yeah, the 30 for 30.
the story behind the story, which is they weren't allowed to shoot in the paint during this game.
Ah.
Do you think that really dilutes this victory?
Yes, it does a little bit.